By the way, I was cutting up Quotely 90s for this week today, last minute. I woke up and I was like, forgot to send it over. And I was cutting it up and you just slayed it last week. Like,
did I?
Yeah, you had like great quips. Your deliveries were great on everything. My deliveries were like, I was listening back. I'm like, did I have a stroke while I was saying all of this?
My deliveries were so good I could work for UPS.
Yeah. Yep.
There, I ruined it.
Welcome to Namely 90s. The podcast that takes you back to the time before smartphones, Google, and Y2K. Join your hosts as they relive the pop culture that shaped a generation and the parts that many people wish they could forget. Listen in to the conversation about how the decade defined those who spent their childhood there and how it shaped them as adults. So, turn down the grunge and dial up the internet. Let's get started. It's time for Namely 90s.
Well, that's right. You're listening to Namely 90s. My name's Andrew, and over there is Brandon.
That's me.
You can find us online at namely90s.com or on Twitter and Instagram at namely90s with a 90s. You can also find the show on YouTube at youtube.com/@namely90s. And if you'd like to support the show, head on over to patreon.com/namely90s, also with 90s, and get signed up for one of our support levels. Welcome to another deep dive episode.
Thank you.
Where Brandon dives deeply into a topic and shares it with us.
Yes. Today's topic.
Diving.
Diving to the depths of the Titanic. No, the Sony Playstation.
Ah, exciting.
Mm-hmm. I mostly wanted to do this because the Sony PlayStation, or the PlayStation, they have the worst names for everything. The PlayStation VR, the PSVR2 comes out on Wednesday. You need a PlayStation 5 console to play it, which you can now finally find in stores. And it's $600, I think.
Oh,
yeah, a little pricey for early adopters. And I don't think that comes with a game. So but basically what they've done is they've stolen, I think, the Oculus touch controls, the little device things, and made it better.
My Target has a sign up in the electronics section that says, for your safety, we do not stock the PS5 in store. You have to buy it online.
Because you might get
like robbed, shanked.
Yeah,
maybe it's Spokane, so it's a fair possibility.
Yeah, I managed to get a PS5 during the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, Sony was doing it where they would, if you had a PlayStation Network like identification, you could sign up for a lottery, and every time they would have it in stock, they would email you. And when I got the email, I was like, well, I don't really need it right now. There's not a game that I want to play on it, because like I knew I would eventually buy it for Grand Theft Auto 6. Because I bought the PS4 for Grand Theft Auto. No, I didn't.
Don't worry, the PS6 will come out by the time GTA 6.
Yeah,
so they can get GTA 5 on 4 consoles.
What did I buy the PS4 for? Might have been Red Dead Redemption 2. But yes, apparently my mature gaming console rig I purchased based on the fact if there's an actual title that I would like to play from Rockstar coming out in the near future.
Supposedly that's coming sooner than we think, I heard.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's things like what was it? The Harry Potter game that came out a couple weeks ago.
Harry Potter.
I don't with all this recording time, I think it came out 2 weeks ago prior to this episode, and there was a lot of conversation about that, where they were talking about like, don't support J.K. Rowling because she's a giant turf, and apparently also racist.
She orders the surf and turf at the the steakhouse.
Yeah. I'll have both medium rare, please. But yeah, she's a little cannibalism with your steak. But the studios bought the rights to it, so she's already made the money.
Yeah, true.
So any money that's going towards it, or like the purchases of the game, doesn't go to her. It goes to the company that developed the game, and it looks like it's supposed to be a good game.
I feel like there's the fun thing about canceling people is depending on how much you like their stuff, you can always justify still patronizing their stuff.
Right. There's an entire there's an entire Harry Potter world at Universal. So do you not go to Universal Studios because they...
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
No, my point is just that, like, if someone's not that talented and they get canceled, everyone's like, oh, well, but then if they're like the person,
good luck making money in the future.
What you have to, the threshold of being canceled, I feel like it's higher if you make better stuff, which isn't fair, but it's true.
I also feel like the degree to which you are something, or like the not the degree, the narrow band, like she's a very narrow band of discrimination. Whereas like if you say widen that to include anything that Kanye West has been talking about in the last year, that gets you canceled a little bit faster.
Like Kanye Best.
Thrown out of shoe companies when you randomly show up in their lobby trying to pitch a new version of your shoes because the old brand dropped you.
Are they going to say trying to pitch a tent?
Yes. That reminds me. I was at Farmer's Market tonight. I texted you that. So there's like a whole, the local fire department like brings a truck out and like hangs around Farmer's Market like once a month, or more often than that. And like there's little kids that come up and they get to look inside a fire truck and whatever. And it's like, so I'm walking downtown. I don't remember if you were here for the Farmer's Market, but
we went to it, or we maybe went to a night market.
It was the Farmer's Market's at night from like 6 to 9.
Oh, that's right. That's where you were.
Yeah. And so like I was just walking by, and then it's like there's all that like right there, and then right on the corner there's a shirtless, unhoused man like repacking his junk into his trousers. Ugh. And I'm just like, there's children right there.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of firemen doing nothing about it. I realize that's not their job. Spray him
with a fire hose.
Well,
he was flying.
I realize that's not their job, and not specifically even in the public service departments their job. But there's children right there.
That's fair.
And this man's junk is half out in public.
Oh no!
Yeah, it was a sight that I wish I could unsee. Yeah, here, so I'll text him over. I made a TikTok about it, so China can see it as well.
Sorry, a dick talk. There it is. Hey-o.
Wasn't that a thing? Ticks out with the talks out.
With your talks out. Yeah.
Yeah. We need to bring that back and put it on a shirt.
Put that on a shirt and sell it.
Yes, I forgot to start the timer when we started. So,
well, I have a timer, so we are good.
I'm at 4 minutes since I started my timer.
I'm at 7:40.
Okay, good to know. 7:40, making copies.
I was born in 1988 or whatever.
Yeah. You're gonna have to be the one to move us on when the time comes. But yeah, it was a little unsettling. And then also, it's an open air market, but it's really crowded, and there's food vendors and there's produce vendors. So they have a rule about not having dogs in the market. And like I walked by a family carrying like 5 dogs through the market.
Let me guess, no one gives a crap about that.
And then there's also a sign that says, "Please don't ride your bike through the market." Nearly got run over by this woman and her son just riding through the street. I'm like,
people cannot heed a sign or a rule. It's just impossible.
Yeah. At least get off your bike, walk it through the crowd, then get back on it. Like, showing your child some bad I guess rule following. I don't know, just bad manners. Like
people just don't think anything applies to them, you know.
The kid almost ran over my foot.
you shove him off, crashes into a garbage can.
Damn near did. Well, not the garbage can, but it was just like I was utterly shocked by the brazenness in which she she almost rubbed my shoulder as not with her hand, with her shoulder as she was passing through. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? So yeah, that's how I feel about things.
It really grinds my gears.
Yeah. Other than that, it was nice. I ran into someone I hadn't seen since before the pandemic, and
wow.
Yeah, that's why. Well, so I go to the farmer's market weekly to get fresh tomatoes, which was hard this week because it's been raining and they don't like the rain.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, but I gotta have those tomatoes, man.
Yeah, a good tomato is worth going to a market or some place for.
Right, maybe not worth $4 a pound.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, I live in a place where you cannot get a good tomato.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I live in a place where I can get good produce just about.
I just remember when we were down there, every time anything had a tomato on it, it was like the best tomato I'd ever tasted.
That puts a lot in context, because I remember Kayla really wanted to go somewhere with like a certain type of salad with fresh stuff on it. I'm just like, yeah, you can get this at home. But I guess you couldn't. So that actually contextualizes the
like, ooh, this tomato's crunchy, delicious.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Oh, this tomato is hard and not good. No.
Speaking of hard and not good, I feel like we should move into your topic.
Good. I don't have a title for this. You're the guy with the titles, but this is the rise and rise of the Sony Playstation. So join me, if you will, down this deep dive here on Namely 90s. We're going to be talking about the Sony Playstation, which is a console, aka the PS1 or the PSX, which was its development title. Yes, I remember hearing, knowing it as, seeing the brand it branded as PSX, but apparently they dropped it before they launched it. Yeah, right. It's a home disc-based video game console developed by Sony Computer Entertainment. It is a 5th generation video game console. I should really start my timer this time. Along with the Sega Saturn, the Nintendo 64, and the 3DO interactive multiplayer. Do you remember the interactive multiplayer?
No.
Neither do I. No, I recognize 3DO. I think I want to say they were related to Neversoft somehow, but I know that they made games. But no, I do not remember the 3DO. One of our friends in the neighborhood had a Saturn, I think.
It's interesting that it's in the same generation as the N64, because isn't it technologically and graphically quite a lot better?
No, it's worse. The PlayStation's the 32-bit system. The Saturn's the 32-bit system.
I feel like the games looked better than the N64 games. The
N64 is a 64-bit system. So
I know. I'm just saying some of the games in Nintendo look kind of.
At no point did the PlayStation look better than the N64.
Really?
Yeah. I think that's ownership bias by both of us.
Maybe.
Well, the only thing that I would say that it might have looked better in later generation or down the line, because it was around longer by the time the N64 started.
Sure.
So there's a 2-year gap between the PlayStation launch and the 64 launch, I think. Which allowed the 32-bit system to look more refined. But
okay.
Like graphically, the N64 looked better.
That makes sense.
I'm sure there's games that look worse, but
I mean, some of the games on Nintendo 64 look so bad. I think that was part of the issue.
Yeah.
Like, some looked fine, but some looked horrible.
So, as I was saying, it's a 32-bit system with a disk drive that plays CD-ROMs. The controller originally featured 4 main buttons: triangle, square, circle, and X buttons. Did you know in Japan that the circle means yes and the X means cancel? Yeah, true fact.
That's seems backwards, but I get it.
It seems backwards, but that's culturally
makes more sense.
Culturally, it made more sense to them.
Yeah.
But I think finally by the PS5 they stopped doing that.
Oh, okay.
Possibly. There's a directional pad, start and select, and 2 left and 2 right bumper buttons: the L1, L2, and R1 and R2. And it all started, the PlayStation started because one man named Ken Kutaragi secretly shared a sound processor with Nintendo. So back in the late 80s, as the Super Famicom, the Super Nintendo, was being developed, Ken Kutaragi convinced Nintendo to use a sound processor he developed at Sony in the Super Nintendo.
Okay.
This partnership got Nintendo thinking that they'd like to continue their disc-based expansion gaming on the Super Famicom. So back, there was an add-on they had on the original Nintendo system, the Famicom, called the Famicom Disk System. The Japanese called the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo the Famicom Family Computer. We call them Nintendos, which is what they released the original Mario 2 on, which we in the West know as the Lost Levels. So it was a floppy disk based system, but it was still disc. Yeah. It was like a proprietary floppy disk looking thing, like the 3.5 inch. It was a little bit smaller, but that kind of thing. So you loaded that in, and that's how you played the expansion games on the old Nintendos. And I don't think that was ever released in the West. So while our friend Ken almost got fired for getting in bed with Nintendo, Kutaragi was eventually praised for the opportunity and that made Sony execs realize that there was money to be made in this video game market. So in 1988, Sony partnered with Nintendo to develop the Super Nintendo, or the SNES PlayStation add-on, with Sony having the option to make a console that could play both the SNES cartridges and the CDs, or Super Discs as they were going to be called after its release. So the catch was, Sony basically took Nintendo's power away with that deal, because Sony would get the rights to any game developed on the Super Discs instead of Nintendo. And at the time, Nintendo was all about controlling their games and having the rights because they had the cartridges. It was kind of, they would sell the carts to the third party producers, and that's how they would make a lot of money on the games. Okay. Yeah, so once the CDs were there, Nintendo realized eventually, took them 3 years, but they realized they were going to lose money on this deal because developers would prefer to use a CD going forward. There's more space, there's better graphics, and they're cheap.
It's not proprietary.
Exactly. And they sought out Sony's competitor, Philips. You remember Philips?
Yes,
Philips
I do.
Around. Yeah.
Yeah, they make all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. They sought them out to, what was I going to say? They sought them out to make a CD system for the Super Nintendo as well. And their deal would allow the Nintendo to retain rights and everything, and make more money than they would with Sony. And don't confuse that with the Philips CDI, which is a disc-based system with Nintendo video games.
Didn't even know about it.
they released 3 Zelda games on the CDI.
Really?
Yes. 2 are kind of the same, and 1 is just completely different, and they're all terrible. So I recommend looking up some Let's Plays of that. Game Grumps did a good version of it.
Oh, it looks horrible.
It's horrendous, and like if you watch the gameplay, like it looks like painted backgrounds, but a lot of those ledges you can jump on. Yeah. But this is a Nintendo thing. Nintendo announced this partnership with Philips the day after Sony unveiled their Super Nintendo or the SNES PlayStation prototype at 1991's Consumer Electronics Show.
Wow. Meanwhile, at the Bad Timing Awards.
Yeah. Dick move, right?
Yeah.
And remember, just I'm a Nintendo fanboy. I think Andrew stands the PlayStation for the most part. Or he's PC Master Race. I don't remember.
I just like the PlayStation seems like a more serious console.
True.
Nintendo's like wacky controllers, and it's like got a weird shape.
Innovation.
Yeah.
After the failed venture and slap in the face from Nintendo, the older generation at Sony were shy of entering the video game market themselves, calling Sega and Nintendo toy companies or toy manufacturers, whereas Sony was, making TVs and CD players and real electronics. But in 1992, Kutagari, with a new LSI chip that he developed to accommodate over 1 million logic gates, which is crazy because I spelled million wrong in my notes.
Milan.
He convinced the old guard at Sony to let him develop a new console with a small team in a Sony subsidiary company with help from Sony Music. I can do this. Sony Music Entertainment Japan, which is another division of Sony. Sony has a lot of divisions I came to find during this research, who were ahead of the game with their CD development because they were one of the biggest CD manufacturers not manufacturers, transcribers, because of the music.
Right.
Yes. So in 1993, they announced do kids know what a CD is now?
Compact disc. No, I don't think so. I mean, they're the shape of CDs that go into the consoles today. They're not CDs, but
right. But do your kids know what a CD is?
They know what a disc is, but they don't know the difference between a CD and a DVD and a Blu-ray.
I guess they're not at the age where they would know the difference, but still.
I think it's just the shape is retained, and colloquially, people will still call it a CD, even if it's not.
Well, I mean, they still make CDs or music. They put music on some CDs.
No, I know. I'm just saying, but some people just use the terms interchangeably. If you're like, hey, hand me that CD for the game. No, it's not obviously not a CD, but
I would smack someone if they said that, unless they were younger than 10. I don't know why that's an arbitrary age. 18. In 1993, they announced I would only smack an adult. In 1993, they announced the Sony PlayStation, which would feature 3D graphics, which they based off of the success of seeing Sega's Virtua Fighter success in arcades that same year. So the early 90s was a tumultuous time in the home video game market. Nintendo really put a foothold in. There was a Famicom in every Japanese household. Essentially, Nintendo was kind of a brand name across America. Sega had also helped corner the market as well. Yeah. And those were the two competitors in the console war in the early 90s. Which some people forget that was the console war. They essentially brought the console market to a binary between those two, killing off competitors like the Atari Jaguar, because Atari was a big console maker back in the 80s. And as I mentioned before, the 3DO interactive multiplayer.
So Boeing and Airbus, right? They choked everyone else out.
Yes, except for Embraer.
Yeah, but they don't. None of them make planes that small, so I guess that makes sense.
That's true. So let's see. for Sony to make a splash in this heavy market between those two, they need the help of third-party developers because Sony didn't know how to make video games.
Right.
So they got a lot of help from their rival, Sega's rival Namco, when they secured Ridge Racer and Mortal Kombat 3, as well as Namco's own 3D fighter Tekken.
Oh yeah,
which
I remember
was
that.
Yeah, that was their answer to Virtua Fighter. I actually had Virtua Fighter on CD for the PC. We got it free with something else, and I was like, this is really cool. This is mind-blowing. Sony acquired Psygnosis, which made the developer kits for the PlayStation, which really helped with third-party devs coming on board, and they made a lot of the PS1 launch titles. Sony wanted to make games on the PlayStation Sony wanted making games on the PlayStation to be really like open and easy to do, unlike the proprietary Sega and Nintendo way, which would help court more third-party developers. And with that CD-ROM format, like we were talking about, it's super easy for devs to use PCs to program the games, whereas that wasn't the case for Sega and Nintendo. I'm pretty sure they had to use like the proprietary some like cart system, because this was like still pre-Windows and stuff.
Yeah.
Which brings us to December 3rd, 1994, the day the PlayStation first launched in Japan.
But first, let's go to Brandon for the Namely 90s Minute.
Welcome back to our mid-episode break, Namely 90s Minute. Every week we look back at a culturally relevant show, movie, or piece of pop culture that probably helps stoke the algorithm. This week, in honor of Andie MacDowell's new movie, My Happy Ending, we're looking back at our favorite 90s MacDowell movie, Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day is a 1993 American comedy starring the groundskeeper from Caddyshack, the love interest in Michael, and Roland Shit from Schitt's Creek. The movie centers around Peter Venkman, a weather reporter who gets sent to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania to cover the annual Groundhog Day celebration with his producer and cameraman. He has contempt for the town and does a half-hearted report before trying to leave, but a blizzard he predicted would pass by the area leaves him stuck in town. The next morning he wakes up in town, but experiences the same day over again. Eventually he gets wise to the situation and realizes he's in a time loop. He then abuses his foreknowledge of the day's events to live life with no consequences, with one-night stands, binge eating, and other crazy things like that. Finally, he sets his sights on seducing his producer, the wife from Multiplicity, but cannot find an easy way to seduce her. Eventually, the voice of Garfield gets depressed and goes through a series of wacky unalivings. He tries convincing the mom from the mansion in Magic Mike XXL that he's stuck in a time loop, and she tells him to think of the loops as ways to improve himself and others' lives. So he does just that, using each loop to learn a new skill like playing piano or ice carving, to helping out townspeople, saving lives, and brightening days, except for one old man who keeps dying no matter what happens. One day he gives an impassioned speech about the groundhog, which impresses his co-workers and the rival news outlets. And then later that evening, the mom from the Footloose remake is impressed by Scrooge playing piano and hearing all the townsfolk tell her how he's helped them during the day. So she bids on him at a date auction, and they go out, fall in love, kiss, and retire to his room. And in the morning, the time loop is finally broken, and Meatballs declares his love for her and the town, saying that they should move there together. Again, she having only spent a single day with him, while he's been in this prison of a town for eternity. And that's Groundhog Day in a Namely 90s Minute. More or less.
And now, back to the show.
Yes, the PlayStation launched to a lot of success, while only a week after the Sega Saturn, which was also a 32-bit disc-based system, and the Sega Saturn tried to edge out the PlayStation with the release of Virtua Fighter in Japan that sold at a 1-to-1 ratio with the Sega Saturn and the game. But the PlayStation managed to sell 100,000 units on its first day and 300,000 by the end of the month and 2 million units after 6 months. Yeah. Before its release in America, though, the console was shown off at 1995's E3, which is, what was it? Electronics Entertainment Expo.
Okay.
Remember when that was a thing? E3? Was that
sure?
Okay. I remember when that was a big thing. None of the big three companies are going to be at it this year.
Wow.
Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft are not going to be at E3, and it was the gaming expo for so long. So I think it's going to die soon. Anyway, the Sega Saturn was also shown off, except Sega again tried to screw over PlayStation or steal the market, whatever you want to look at it, by announcing it was releasing the Sega Saturn that day at select retailers. Wow. Yes, which I think is kind of a weird move because in 1995 we barely had internet access. How would you know that it launched that day?
Well,
it was a surprise release at select retailers across America.
I feel like in this day and age, people would still be all over that.
Yeah.
But you have the internet.
In this day and age, you would get a Twitter alert and I'd be like frantically tapping on my phone to get it. But back then, it backfired. Consumers feeling they weren't informed in time for the launch, because again, you would have to wait until like the trade magazines came out, or at least the newspaper the next day. It's not like there was.
They send you a fax.
Yeah, it's not like there was gaming news in 1995. Some retailers dropped the sale of the device altogether in protest, like KB Toys did.
That's
good
nuts.
That did. Yeah. Sony Playstation released in North America on September 9th, 1995, and sold more units in 2 days than the Sega Saturn did in 5 months. The 5 months leading up to it. And by the end of the year, it sold over 800,000 units in North America, which really makes me question the 2 mil number in 6 months in Japan. But hey, it was its first year.
Yeah.
At launch, there were 17 games available for the PlayStation compared to the Saturn 6, and it received over 100,000 pre-orders. And then I have for the Europe release, it was September 29th, 95, and in Australia it was November 15th, 1995. So in the console war, Sony, not Nintendo, was responsible for edging Sega out and putting the final nail in their coffin.
I mean, to be fair, Sega did a lot of the work too.
True. And Nintendo also kind of helped, but it was surprising to me because I just assumed Nintendo won because Nintendo won against Sega, but only to be replaced.
I mean, they won at the end of the day, but not at their own doing, I guess.
Exactly. But I had always just assumed Nintendo was better because I was a Nintendo fanboy. So Saturn was outsold by the PlayStation 2-1 for the first few years of its life in North America. Not to mention the Saturn launched at $400, whereas the PlayStation was $300. And then both companies cut their prices when the launch of the Nintendo 64 happened, and they cut their prices to $200 each. But Sony was the only one who saw steady sales to continue while the Nintendo 64 was taking the world by storm. Yes, I editorialized that.
By storm.
All that being said, in Japan, Sony had a harder time snuffing out Sega, and the Saturn managed to stay competitive with the PlayStation for a few years. When Sega released their 128-bit Dreamcast in 1998 in Japan, it didn't do well. And there were reports that disgruntled gamers were returning their Dreamcasts for store credit and buying PlayStation games instead.
Oof. So if that's 128 bits, is the PlayStation 5 like 75 million bits? Or at a certain point, does the amount of bits not really take you anywhere?
I want to say the Dreamcast was the last one to do that. I think the GameCube was 256, but I'm not exactly sure about that. The PS2 didn't advertise that way, and I don't recall any consoles that generation advertising it that way other than the Dreamcast. But yeah. Other than in Super Smash Brothers, there was a 256 wireframe Super Smash Brothers Melee. There was a 256 wireframe fighter thing, where in the previous one they were polygon fighters because of the 64. Anyway, in the first year, the PlayStation secured 20% of the video game market, and by the end of 1999, it had 60%. Sony effectively replaced Sega in the binary 90s console war, and it revolutionized gaming controllers, evolving from the initial controller, which we talked about earlier. You may have noticed there were no joysticks mentioned. So it upgraded to the dual analog, which added 2 analog joysticks to the middle of the controller. And after that, they introduced the dual analog. The dual analog was replaced by the dual shock, which added rumble features built into the controller, which was kind of revolutionary for the time.
Right.
Nintendo would not add internal rumble until the 6th generation with the GameCube controllers, and their wireless ones didn't have it. And the PlayStation success managed to get it in a redesign, the PS1 in 2000, which outsold all other consoles that year, including its own successor.
Wow.
Yes. In March of 1999, Sony announced a successor, the PlayStation 2, which eventually went on to be the best-selling console of all time.
Jeez, I didn't know that.
Yes. It is. I looked up the list. Right now, I think the Switch is close to giving a run for its money, but it's the PS2 not only outlived or had like such a long lifespan. Everyone had one. They redesigned it so many times that it was impossible not to have it. I honestly thought the Wii sold more because of it expanded the market to new people, and like everyone had a Wii, right?
I guess.
But no,
I think there were a lot of really popular games on PlayStation 2 as well, which drove sales further.
That's true. Its successor, the PS3, became one of the 2 choices in the 7th generation against the Xbox 360, which I don't think it actually lost to the Wii, even though I wrote that. But they outclassed the Wii, obviously, because the Wii was a GameCube with motion controls,
right?
But the Wii found a new market, whereas those two had the hardcore gamer market,
right?
The ones that aren't PC players. They also ripped off the Wii for a better hardware version of the Wii controllers, which they called the PS Move, I believe. And they eventually put Nintendo down with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One generation, which introduced the PSVR, which is a virtual reality headset that runs off of the PS4. Although Nintendo didn't stay dead, they just quickly moved on past the Wii U to the Switch, and which is brings us to the current generation console, the PlayStation 5, which was continuously sold out for over a year at launch during the pandemic, and is just now becoming regularly available in like the last 6 months. And as I said earlier in this episode, the PSVR2 launches on Wednesday, the 22nd, and they ripped off a bunch of touch sense controls from the higher end VRs that are out right now. But it looks like it's going to be good. I don't know if it's going to be worth the price tag. And it's not going to be supported as well because it's niche. You have to have the console to do it. Whereas, Meta, the Quest, you can do wirelessly, and others just require a PC. But, if you have a PS5, I think it's worth it to get it maybe after a price drop. But yeah, that's the story of the PlayStation, the first PlayStation. A deeper dive.
I feel like it seems to me like Nintendo just kind of always tried to do something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't.
Always.
But they never adapted to the shifting market.
Mm-hmm.
And it always stayed cute, but I think people don't want cute as much anymore. They want immersive, the hardcore gamers want immersive, intense games,
Right.
I mean, yeah, it was fun to bowl on the Wii or whatever. Like that was entertaining for 5 minutes, but I don't know, maybe it works better in Japan, but in the US, I just don't. I mean, everyone wants to shoot terrorists in the US.
Yeah. Everyone wants to be Jack Bauer. I think Nintendo found its market with the Wii, and they realized that if they target the family as the family console, because that's what they were. That's what the Nintendo, that's what the Super Nintendo was. It was designed for like kids to play with the family. It was seen as a toy in Japan originally. So like, and while there's some of us that still enjoy going back, and I still enjoy playing new Nintendo releases, I also need a separate console to play the terrorist killing games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Unless you
consider Bowser a terrorist, which technically.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless you want to spray paint at a bunch of squids, but yeah. If not for the PlayStation, where would we be?
I don't know.
Maybe we'd all just have Xboxes, but
probably. Yeah. But would Microsoft have gotten into the game if not for the X or the PS, whatever?
PS2. Yeah, that's a good question. My bet would be yes, but would they have pushed the consoles as hard if they didn't have the competition? And I don't think they would have. Yeah.
Oh, and then you have to buy the special attachment for the Xbox. It's a controller that has a Control Alt and Delete button on it.
Yeah,
like watch. It probably doesn't even run Windows in the background. It's probably on Linux or something. Apple.
It's an Apple
iOS,
product. Yeah. That'd be funny. Any final thoughts on the PlayStation? I know you had one, and we've probably talked about it before.
We had the first one. I know. We had some games. The one that I remember are Gran Turismo and Final Fantasy VIII.
Mm-hmm. I remember you having those. Well, and Grand Theft Auto 2.
I think we had that on the PC. Potentially.
You had it on the PlayStation because you were playing it on your big screen TV. This is a story that I always remember. You invited me over to play this really cool game and had me watch you play it.
For some reason, I remember that being on PC. But yeah, anyway, then we got the PS2 and GTA 3, and all bets were off.
Oh yeah, and then I convinced my mom to get my dad a PlayStation 2 for his birthday because it's a DVD player, and then I somehow managed to get Grand Theft Auto 3 as well.
Yeah. No, I remember I would listen to Linkin Park and play GTA 3. I was really angsty back then.
Yeah. Yeah. I would listen to Chatterbox the whole time, and that's why I can quote nearly all of it from memory.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's it for this week's deep dive edition of Namely 90s. Remember, you can find new episodes out every Monday. Join us for next week for another variety show episode, and find us on Twitter and Instagram at Namely 90s with 90s, or our personal Twitter accounts at bshooty and at Namely Andrew, and tell us what you want us to talk about on future deep dive episodes. If you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Namely90s, also with the 90s. Finally, you can also contact us through our website, Namely90s.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Audible, PSX, Deezer, TuneIn, iHeart, Good Pods, and wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Brandon, that's Andrew, and we'll catch you next time.
It's like I have the plague.